Welcome to part 2 of the Cadenza podcast, Scenes Edition, in conversation with bassist, composer, and bandleader Rich Brown. I'm your host, Tim Harrison. In part 1, Rich talked about his experiences battling racism and ignorance during his time living in Florida, his musical influences growing up, and how he became part of the jazz scene in Toronto. In part 2, we talk more about his approach to music and communication, discuss the responsibility of the artist to create a relationship with the audience, and get a glimpse into the future of his band Rinse the Algorithm. Thank you for checking out the Cadenza podcast Scenes Edition, and here is part 2 of my conversation with Rich Brown. You just recently released a solo album, A Bang, which is played by the band The Abang.
Yes.
Right? I got to make sure I get that right. And the liner notes are very personal and very socially aware, talking about Black Lives Matter and the racism and the nationalism that's growing these days.
Yeah.
How do you maintain positivity when you're taking such very vital topics and having a very powerful statement to make, but still allowing people to feel positive in some way when they listen to your music?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I think there has to be some sort of message of hope. It's easy to sort of sit in the despair. But you have to take whatever steps necessary to make some sort of change. And I think hope is one of the most important messages that we can apply to our own art. I was very hesitant about putting those liner notes on because I know how divisive those 3 words can be, Black Lives Matter. So I had to be very careful, but I also felt that it was important for me to state my own feelings on the matter because I've gone through a lot, and the fact that we still need to address this in 2017 can be really disheartening, and depressing, and it could just make you want to, put your head under the covers and just stay there. But if my music can offer some sort of hope or some sort of positive message in this weird time that we're living in now, then I know I'm not going to change any minds because things are so polarized right now. But maybe it can lead to a discussion or something. Maybe it can lead to something where we're not all yelling at each other, because it's not, my audience is not going to be 100% liberals or 100% conservatives. There's going to be a mix in there. And even if there's no discussion at all about politics during one of my shows, there's nothing divisive about what's going on stage. So I feel like that message of hope is universal, whether you're on the left or on the right. Everyone's sort of looking for something positive. And if I can supply that or apply that, then I'll take the opportunity to do so. I don't want to be preachy about it because that turns people right off. But I think, the advantage of instrumental music is that it can create a personal visual image. So that, I don't know, I feel like that hope can be something that's expressed and conveyed and felt and shared equally by everyone, no matter what their political leanings may be. So I think it's important, Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. And you know, there's often the sort of stay in your lane concept with artists, you know,
Yeah.
where people are just saying, listen, go out and play music. Don't talk about politics, you know, and I think that that's very narrow-minded and short-sighted because everybody has the opportunity to speak, and this is how you speak, right?
Yeah.
You speak in tone. It's just a different tone. You're using a bass instead of a voice, perhaps. I have a copy of a Bang, and I hadn't opened it. I bought it digitally as well as physically.
Yeah.
But I had read somewhere that there were some interesting liner notes, so I paused long and hard, and then I finally opened it because I like to keep these things nice and wrapped, and read them, and I thought, this puts all of that music into a different context now. I get the direction, like I understood how it applied, how I perceived it. But then reading those liner notes, I could actually bring a narrative into it suddenly. And I could understand the path that the songs took. And I thought that was really important for me to have that experience and to read it and to see why you were presenting the music in such a way.
Thank you.
And I think that was really important. So I'm a fan. I think the music is amazing.
Thanks very much.
But that was a great experience to have that journey and to experience it as music and then experience it as message and to apply both.
Yeah.
And come out with something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Well, you know, artists have a platform. And, you know, I remember hearing all the backlash that Meryl Streep got for speaking her mind. I just think that's ridiculous. You know, she has this platform. She has an opportunity to speak truth to power, you know? And why not take that opportunity? And how dare anyone try to silence her for her views, you know? I don't want to go so far as to say that I have a responsibility to do so, because some people they just want to play music and have fun, and that's totally cool. But given my past experience with racism and all the weirdness that has gone on in my childhood, I do feel some sense of responsibility to you know, just shed some light and say, this is what's going on, or maybe just hold up the mirror and say, you need to take a hard look at what's happening. So yeah, I you know, I do take that opportunity, but again, I don't beat people over the head with it, or at least I hope that I don't. You know? Yeah,
I wouldn't say that I saw any, you know, didactic behavior out of this.
Yeah.
It was, you know, I experienced the music, you know, before the message,
right,
and then the message just added to it. And same thing with the Rinse album, the Locutions. I've heard you introduce songs on stage and give some backstory about some of those songs. And having heard the songs first and then heard the backstory afterwards, it's more of a 1 + 1 = 5, right? It gives me more of an opportunity to say, now I get the context. This is more to me than it was before.
Yeah. You know, I when I'm on stage, I feel very self-conscious about speaking to the audience because I speak almost after every tune, because I feel that there is a story that is associated with the music, or at least an image that I want the listener to see, to visualize. And I feel like making that connection is important, you know? So I will sort of explain the idea behind a particular song. And then when we play that song, hopefully it will make sense, a little more sense to the listener. That 1 + 1 = 5 idea happens for everyone. Because that's the other thing. Like, this is instrumental music. And it's a lot to ask of an audience to have them sit through, you know, 2 full 1-hour sets of instrumental music. So I think this is a great way to sort of bridge that gap by giving the audience a little bit of work. This is what the song is about. see if you can understand the message or see the visual. Like one of the songs on the record is a song called Parody of Esteem, which is a song about mental illness. And every time we play that song, when I come off stage, I always explain what the song is about and explain that it literally sort of illustrates a breakdown or someone who's struggling. And every time we play that song, someone comes up to me and says, man, I totally get that song. I heard everything. I see exactly where you're coming from. And those people aren't always musicians. That's the beautiful thing, you know? That's, I think that's why the message is important, especially with this kind of music, because then you can really sort of open it up to people who might not necessarily be seen at a jazz gig or be interested in watching a jazz band all night. But this is the way to sort of bridge that gap and get to everyone at the same time. Musos and non-musos.
Well, I have to admit, I was one of the ones that came up to you after you played that song.
That's right.
And said, I absolutely get where you're going with this. And it was really important to me as somebody who's had that experience and who has suffered with PTSD and anxiety over the years, that to have somebody stand up on stage and say, I'm going to present to you an image of somebody who is in crisis.
Yeah.
And to sit in the audience and to hear somebody say that publicly on stage and then present that picture was incredible. It's such an experience to have people in a room accept that moment.
Yeah.
And to live in that moment with you for a bit. So they may get a view of what it's like to have to deal with that.
But the other thing about that is, that's a really good point. But the other thing is there are more people struggling than are willing to admit. Mm-hmm. So anytime I introduce that song, there's always an eyebrow or two that's raised from someone who's also struggling. Mm-hmm. And then they realize, they sort of look around the room and see other people. Okay, so I'm not alone in this. So there's a little bit of a solidarity that happens as well that I'm kind of proud of. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is what I'm talking about, like being able to sort of bring people together on different levels. I mean, this is not the happiest of messages, mm-hmm. but there's that hope, right? I mean, here I'm sort of giving an illustration of somebody who's really struggling, but there are always a few people, not just one or two people, but there are always a few people in the audience who are going through the same struggle. And if they can feel like they're not alone, then that's the hope and maybe even the change that I can maybe initiate or something, or help in some small way. I think it's important,
Well, I certainly felt that way. That was a great experience, as well as just recently, Rents did a 3-night stand at Jazz Bistro. And I was there for the first night only. I apologize, I couldn't make it for 3. But you introduced a track, The Purple Time.
Oh yeah,
and it's actually always been one of my favorites. The groove on that is fantastic. But you spoke a little about the genesis of it and why you play that song.
Yeah.
And that night, that song went from a great song to an incredible experience because of the bringing us, the audience, into why it was important to you, and watching the band members just start to just really bring it to a different level. So that audience communication, that ability to bring the audience in and to give them a visual, mm-hmm. give them an idea of where you want to go and why you want to go there, I think is really important, and you don't see it that often.
Yeah, well, yeah, you don't. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I would say keep talking during your shows.
Yeah, well, I will. I just, I feel like instrumental music is a challenge for a lot of people. And I have to be cognizant of the fact that my audience is not we talked about my audience not being 100% liberal or 100% conservative. They're not going to be 100% musicians either.
Mm-hmm.
So I really have to make the experience not just enjoyable, but something universal. So I'm not just relating to the musicians or the bass players or whatever. I really want everyone in the audience and even the guys in the band to have the exact same experience. That's really important to me, and that makes for a much better, more enjoyable experience for everyone on and off the stage. So even when I'm introducing these stories and talking about like what these songs are about, it's not just for the audience, it's for the band as well, because I want them to interpret the idea behind the songs as well. So now everyone is sort of focused on this one idea, So I do feel that it's important. Maybe I talk a little bit too much. Maybe I have been talking a little bit too much. But I feel that it's an important thing for me as a composer to sort of get the idea across to the audience, so that they know why certain things are happening with the music.
You also released a solo bass album,
yes,
which I've heard you introduce tracks on stage and say, "Don't be afraid,
Yeah.
don't be afraid of solo bass. It's not scary," and it's a very mood-oriented album. It's not a chops fest.
Yeah.
It's about setting a tone. What brought you to wanting to do that tonal album in and of itself?
Well, there were a few things. There were a few sort of ideas behind putting that album together. I started to just, for fun, I just started to write these solo bass pieces. And I would play them between songs at gigs. And they all got a really good response. So I decided to explore that a little bit more. And because the electric bass has had this weird stigma for so long about being, whatever, fully sort of chops oriented or whatever, I wanted to create something that would be the complete antithesis of that. I wanted to create something that would be listened to in the same way that you would listen to a classical recording. Because I like that mood. I like being sort of that sort of serenity, and I was also listening to a lot of different styles of music. I got into an Armenian musician named Jivan Gasparian. I don't know if you know him. He plays an instrument called the duduk.
Ah, yes. I love the sound of a duduk.
Right?
Absolutely love it. Yeah.
So I had a couple of his records, and I really got into the mindset. And I wanted to create something similar. The song Beacon, not Beacon, Borealis, is kind of an ode to Jivan Gasparian. In the way that it's set up, that there's this drone and then these little sort of melodic phrases that happen over the drone for the entirety of the piece. And then the melodies sort of develop into these different things, and then everything just sort of comes back down. But I like the mood that sets, and the idea of sort of maintaining that particular mood for an entire album, I found intriguing and challenging, and it was something that I really wanted to explore. And so I went in. A friend of mine offered some studio time at his house. He has a home studio. So we went and recorded all these tunes. And then when I listened to everything from top to bottom, I thought, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to say, exactly what I wanted to do, So I'm very proud of that record. And I feel like it does do that very thing where you put it on and it immediately puts you in a mood. And again, hopefully, it's one of those things where if you're not having the best day, it can turn that around a little bit for you. It can give you that little bit of serenity that we need. Yeah.
So I recently saw an iteration of DAP Theory in Toronto.
Yeah.
And you sat in for a track.
Yeah.
I was there with our common friend Bartosz Hatala, and
Oh,
he
yeah.
said, Rich will be sitting in. And I said, oh, I see. And one of his close friends was from school was playing in the band and was playing Duduk. Interestingly
Oh, right.
enough.
Yeah.
Tell me a little about the influence that you had on DAP Theory, or DAP Theory had on you, and how that adjusted your outlook on music and the direction of your playing.
Well, wow. Where do I start?
At the beginning.
Yeah. Well, the beginning was 1999. When I was trying to get the Steve Coleman gig. And Andy Milne, who's the leader of DAP Theory, was in Steve Coleman's band. He did a bunch of records with him and toured with him, and I was such a huge fan. And they would play in Toronto at this spot called the Bamboo, which is no longer there.
The late lamented Bamboo.
Yeah, man. That place was hot. But I would always be there, front and center, and I had all the albums, and I would practice to all those tunes and all the sort of intricate patterns and cues and things. Like, I studied that music up and down. So I remember talking to Andy after a set one night and said, "Look, I'd really love to get this gig." And I felt particularly confident because there was a sub on bass who really wasn't cutting it. So I thought, I could do better than this guy. So Andy said, yeah, send me a tape and I'll send it to Steve. So I sent the tape and it never got to Steve. Andy called me and said that he's going to be doing some demo recordings for a record that he's putting together, and asked if I'd be willing to fly to Washington, D.C. to record the demos. I was like, absolutely, yeah. So I did, and those demos ended up being part of an album called The New Age of Aquarius, which is the first of 2 records that I recorded with DAP Theory. That music, there's so much about that band that has influenced me, not only as a bass player, but definitely as a composer. And you can hear, I think you'll be able to hear the sort of the parallels between DAP Theory and my band. And, it's no accident. Like, I spent a lot of time with that music, and I love that music. And, for me at that time, it was the best musical situation for me. And it had such a major influence. Specifically with, rhythmic patterns and different kinds of harmonic structure. That sort of worked its way into my compositional voice, I guess. So the influence is definitely, I would say that it's one way where DAP Theory really influenced my direction in such an invaluable way. Like, I'm very grateful for the experience and what it has done for my progression and my growth as a musician. And it was fun, man. It was fun to get back up on stage with those dudes and just play that tune. It brought back a lot of memories. I'm sure it did for Andy as well. But yeah, that's been a major influence. I feel like, especially with this latest record, The Abang, there's a heavy DAP Theory influence, and there's a heavy influence from some of the artists that I've worked with in recent years, Vijay Iyer and Rudresh Mahanthapa and Steve Lehman, in particular, those 3 guys. Because I feel like they've taken that music, the music of Steve Coleman, the music of DAP Theory, and they've added like these different elements that are so personal and so interesting. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I have to figure out my own way of doing it, so it doesn't sound like, oh, he's just doing the Dap Theory thing, or he's just doing the Steve Coleman thing.
Mm.
So it was those other influences that allowed for me to sort of discover that, like, who I am. Who am I playing this music? You know.
And in one case, it's a name on the album.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Ridresh. I love that guy. That guy's my brother, man. So the first song on the album is dedicated to him, and it's called Mahishmatish. Do we have time for the story?
We have time for the story.
So Ridresh, he would play these shows in New York, and he'd get home and he'd still be wired. You know, he wouldn't want to go to bed like right when he got home. So he'd turn the TV on, and there would be, I don't know if you remember this, but there would be this guy named Esteban who would have these hour-long infomercials selling his guitar lessons.
Oh, jeez.
And his music. And Esteban was like this sort of pseudo flamenco dude. I mean, I'm not a fan. But anyway. But Rudresh, he just found the guy so interesting, and he became sort of addicted to these infomercials. So then it turned out that the wife of a friend of his was doing PR for Esteban. So Rudresh said, look, I need this guy's autograph. It would be great if I could get an autograph. So the dude went to his wife and said, look, if you can get an autograph from my friend Rudresh Mahantapa, that would be great. So she went to Esteban and asked him for an autograph. And Esteban said, great, what's his name? And then she blanked. So she made up a name. She said, oh no. She said, yeah, it's for my husband's friend, Ruchin Mahishmatish. So Mahishmatish stuck. Even now when Rudresh calls, like it says Mahishmatish on it.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And that song, I mean, to me, it sounds like something that Rudresh would write. I really wanted something that would sort of reflect his energy and his spirit. He's such a wonderful guy and really giving and really funny, and my experiences with him on the road have always been super positive and really fun, and I wanted all of that to come out in this song. And what better way to title it with something as crazy and whimsical as Mahishmatish. So,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, people don't get Rich Brown wrong that often.
No. I got called Rich Brand once on the radio. I was like, how do you mess up Brown?
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, well.
Whatever, it's another story in the arsenal.
That's
right?
exactly it. Yeah, man.
So now you have Rinse the Algorithm sort of 2.0. You're
feels like it.
back in style with Rinse. I saw you do a couple of warm up shows out in the West End.
Oh yeah.
And then you brought it to the Jazz Bistro and brought the house down.
That was the best.
Unbelievable. It was quite a thing to behold, and you've got such amazing players with you. Larnell, Lewis, Robbie.
Yeah.
Does this feel like a new beginning? Or does it feel like a continuation of what Rinse has been? Do you feel like this is the start of another upswing of where you want to go?
That's an interesting question. I feel like it could be a new beginning for this band. Although, having said that, I can't get over enthusiastic about that, because the reason why the band stopped playing was the fact that Robbie and Larnell and even Lewis were getting very busy with other projects. So I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't call them after a while because they were always away, or always had other commitments. So I thought, I have this new band. I'll just focus on that, and then Rinse will sort of go the way of the dodo. But then Larnell called to do a show in Quebec City and asked if Rinse would be able to get together and play a couple of tunes. So we did that, and it felt amazing. And then I got a chance to talk to Robert Sput Seawright, who's the other drummer in Snarky Puppy. And he came up to me after the set and was like, "Is that your band?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, these your tunes?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, does this band play very often?" I was like, "No, these guys are too busy." And Spud said, "Well, you need to make this busy." And I thought, that's such an obvious, why didn't I think of that? So, I'm trying to focus on getting some more work for the band, but I realize the fact that I'm going to run into the same hurdles the more I try to book them. I think the way to do it now with this particular group is to figure out when the guys are in town and then book dates around those times, as opposed to the other way around, where you get a date and then you send out a message, "Are you guys around for this?" Doesn't always work out that way. But I think this could be a little more productive, as far as getting more gigs for the band. And I'd really like the next album to be another Rinse album. So, yeah, I'm just sort of putting pen to paper now and trying to write some more music that would be a little more indicative of the first album without sounding like Locutions Part 2. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like compositionally, A Bang was such a departure. It was a real sort of exploration into different compositional ideas. And that is kind of the focus of that band. Whereas Rinse is really about these four guys just making great music, So I think I want to focus on that relationship when I start writing for this next album. Because even though the same guys, like, it's basically Rinse on the A Bang record.
Right, yeah.
But to me, it doesn't sound like a Rinse record, so I couldn't, in good conscience, go that route. So I just put it out under my name. And then hopefully the next album will sound like a Rinse record.
Well, I guess it's all up to the composer, right?
That's the thing.
The mindset of the composer and the direction you want to go that you feel is important.
Yeah, and I feel like that, in hindsight, that was a bit of a misstep that I had made, where I started writing all this music and immediately making the assumption that just because the four of us are playing these new songs, it's just going to sound like Rinse the Algorithm. And I realized, like, even during the first rehearsals, that was not going to be the case. Like, it just sounded like something completely different. It sounded like I had hired these three guys to play this new material, as opposed to it actually sounding like Rinse the Algorithm. So I went in a different direction, and I feel like that's the one. I hesitate to call it a mistake because it wasn't really anything that was all that unfortunate, but I feel like I should be, for the next album, I should probably write more with the guys in mind, So hopefully the next Rinse album will be out. Who knows?
Soon. It's coming soon. Well, I look forward to it, for one.
You and me both, brother.
Yeah. Well, I will buy an album. I will digitally download an album, and I'll show up to the shows. That's the best I can do.
That's
if you give me a job playing a cowbell on it, I will show up. I'm happy to do so.
Be careful what you wish for, man.
Well, I don't know if my home studio downstairs is so prepared for that, but
we'll make it work.
Oh, what a kind soul you are. For myself, you and I met I don't know, probably a year ago, maybe, well, I guess 2 years ago, you were playing with Bartosz. And I was absolutely inspired by your playing and your approach to bass. I am very much on the periphery of the music industry in Toronto. I'm just a passionate sponsor of other people's dreams.
I like that.
But when I had something that I wanted to do, which was the New Shores project, I approached you and asked if you'd be interested in donating some track time and some music, and you were very receptive to that. And
oh yeah,
and I really appreciated that. It's really important to me that to hear people are interested in adding a voice, and when we talk about, adding your voice to, the Black Lives Matter, whether it's the movement or the concept of people understanding why it's important, I felt that there was at least some political alignment that you and I could understand and be on the same page. So I really appreciate that you've offered to do that. That's fantastic.
It's my pleasure, and again, I feel like it's my responsibility, and especially with this project, I feel like once that ridiculous election was over, there was a narrative that was being put forth by the right where they were trying to tell people that globalism doesn't work, which is an argument that falls flat on its face, like right out of the gate. Like, we live on one planet, and we are one human race. So why not take the opportunity to help each other when we have that opportunity? It just doesn't make any sense to me to hear someone say that globalism doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's just maddening. So, I didn't hesitate. Of course I would say yes to something like this.
Well, I appreciate that. It's still a work in progress as I try and put it all together, but I look forward to having you on board and having the sound of your voice from a bass perspective, verbally written in any way, as part of that to help support refugee resettlement. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
And thanks for sitting down and spending the time today. I mean, it's now gotten a little gray outside, but at least we've had some good weather and a great conversation.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rich. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, brother.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
To learn more about Rich Brown, please find him on Facebook at Rich Brown and his Facebook page, Rich Brown Electric Bassist, or follow him on Twitter at Rich the Algorithm. To find Rinse the Algorithm's Locutions album and Rich's solo work, you can visit his Bandcamp site, rinsethealgorithm.bandcamp.com, or check them out on iTunes. For more information on the New Shores project, to which Rich Brown is a contributing artist, please check out newshoresproject.org or at New Shores Music on both Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for checking out the Cadenza podcast, Scenes Edition. Cadenza features conversations with musicians, producers, educators, and artists who are passionate about sharing their stories of shaping new sounds, experiences, and ideas. Look for new episodes including the Sounds Edition, the audio podcast, and live special editions featuring performances from notable artists. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again.